Have you ever witnessed someone being torn down in public and wished you had the courage to step in? Tell me in the comments what state you're from and whether you've ever seen toxic relationships play out in restaurants or public spaces. Today's story is about what happens when the right person is sitting close enough to hear everything. Chloe Matthews pressed her cloth napkin against her trembling hands beneath the white linen tablecloth, hoping Derek wouldn't notice how badly she was shaking. The upscale Italian restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of expensive silverware against fine china. But all she could hear was the dangerous edge creeping into her boyfriend's voice. At 24, Chloe had worked tirelessly to build her career as a marketing assistant at a prestigious downtown firm. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in the sophisticated chignon Derek preferred, and she wore the conservative black dress he'd selected from her closet that morning. Everything about her appearance had been carefully curated to meet his exacting standards, yet somehow she'd still managed to disappoint him. "You embarrassed me in front of the Hendersons," Derek hissed, leaning forward just enough that his words wouldn't carry to the neighboring tables. His perfectly styled blonde hair caught the warm restaurant lighting, and his expensive suit suggested success and refinement to anyone watching from a distance. But Chloe could see the familiar tightness around his blue eyes that meant trouble was coming. "Do you have any idea how important that contract is to my firm?" "I didn't say anything wrong," Chloe whispered back, her green eyes darting nervously toward the table where Derek's potential clients sat finishing their dessert. "I just mentioned that I'd read about similar marketing campaigns in industry publications. I thought it showed I was engaged in the conversation." Derek's jaw clenched visibly. "You thought wrong. Mrs. Henderson specifically mentioned that she preferred working with firms that understood traditional values. Your little feminist commentary about women in leadership probably just cost me a $250,000 account." The accusation hit Chloe like a physical blow. She hadn't made any feminist commentary. She'd simply agreed when Mrs. Henderson mentioned that her daughter was considering business school, sharing that several women at her own company had found great success in marketing roles. The conversation had seemed pleasant and natural at the time, but now Derek was twisting her words into something threatening and inappropriate. "I was just trying to be friendly," she said, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. They seemed to enjoy talking about their daughter's future. Derek's fingers tightened around his wine glass, and for a moment Chloe feared he might actually throw it. Instead, he set it down with controlled precision and fixed her with the cold stare she'd learned to dread over their 2-year relationship. "You don't get to decide what they enjoyed, Chloe. You don't understand business relationships the way I do. You're a junior assistant at a mid-tier company. I'm trying to build something here, and you keep sabotaging me with your need to insert yourself into every conversation." The words landed with practiced cruelty, each one designed to remind her of her perceived inadequacies. Derek had a gift for identifying her insecurities and weaponizing them with surgical precision. Her lack of advanced education compared to his MBA, her smaller salary compared to his 6-figure income, her quiet nature compared to his commanding presence in social situations. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the apology automatic after months of conditioning. "I didn't mean to cause any problems." "Sorry doesn't fix the damage," Derek replied, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that made her blood run cold. "But don't worry. We'll discuss this properly when we get home. You're done when we get home." The threat hung in the air between them like a blade. Chloe's breathing became shallow as familiar fear crept up her spine. She knew exactly what those words meant. Derek had never hit her in public, but behind closed doors was a different matter entirely. The psychological torment was constant, but the physical escalations had been increasing in frequency and intensity over the past few months. 3 tables away, a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit had been trying to focus on his own dinner conversation, but the tension radiating from the young couple near the window kept drawing his attention. Dante Romano had built his reputation on reading people and situations with deadly accuracy, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that he was watching something dangerous unfold. At 33, Dante commanded respect through a combination of old-world charm and new-world ruthlessness. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and his olive complexion spoke to his Sicilian heritage. But it was his eyes that most people remembered, a distinctive gray-green that could shift from warm to Arctic in the span of a heartbeat. Tonight, They were focused entirely on the auburn-haired woman who was clearly fighting not to cry. Marco, his second-in-command, followed Dante's gaze and frowned slightly. "Everything all right, boss?" Dante didn't answer immediately. He'd built his empire by knowing when to act and when to observe. But something about the woman's obvious distress was triggering protective instincts he usually reserved for family. She was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features and an elegance that her companion seemed determined to crush. More importantly, she was afraid, and Dante had strong feelings about men who terrorized women. The situation escalated when Derek reached across the table and grabbed Chloe's wrist with enough force to make her wince. His grip left white marks on her pale skin as he pulled her hand toward him, his voice still low but his body language unmistakably aggressive. "Smile," he commanded through gritted teeth. "The Hendersons are looking over here, and you're going to fix this. You're going to walk over there, apologize for any confusion in your earlier remarks, and make it clear that you fully support traditional family values and business practices." Chloe's eyes filled with tears she couldn't allow to fall. The pain in her wrist was sharp and immediate, but the humiliation cut deeper. Around them, other diners continued their meals obliviously, unaware that someone at table 12 was being systematically broken down by someone who claimed to love her. "Derek, please," she breathed. "You're hurting me." Instead of releasing her, his grip tightened. "I'll let you know when you're hurt," he replied coldly. "Right now, you're just learning a lesson you should have figured out months ago." That was when Dante Romano made his decision. He signaled the sommelier with a subtle gesture, then murmured something to Marco that sent his lieutenant into immediate action. Within moments, an expensive bottle of champagne was being delivered to Derek and Chloe's table, along with the sommelier's explanation that it was a gift from an admirer of Derek's business acumen. The interruption forced Derek to release Chloe's wrist as he turned to accept the unexpected gift with practiced charm. He scanned the restaurant until his eyes landed on Dante, who raised his own glass in a polite salute. Derek nodded back with the kind of preening satisfaction that suggested he believed his own reputation had earned him such recognition. But Dante was already moving, crossing the restaurant with the fluid confidence of a man accustomed to commanding any room he entered. He approached their table with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, extending his hand to Derek while his peripheral vision tracked every detail of Chloe's condition. "Forgive the interruption," he said smoothly, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent that spoke to old country roots. "I'm Dante Romano. I couldn't help but notice you from across the room, and I was hoping you might be Derek Chambers from Chambers Financial Group." Derek's chest puffed with obvious pride as he shook Dante's hand. "That's right. And you are?" "I have several business interests in the city," Dante replied vaguely. "Construction, restaurants, import-export. I've been looking for a financial advisor with your reputation for handling complicated portfolios." The conversation should have been Derek's dream scenario, exactly the kind of networking opportunity he lived for. But Dante's presence seemed to fill all the available space at their table, and his attention kept drifting to Chloe with an intensity that made Derek's possessive instincts flare dangerously. "This is my girlfriend, Chloe Matthews," Derek said stiffly, his hand moving to rest possessively on her shoulder. "Chloe, say hello to Mr. Romano." Chloe looked up to meet Dante's eyes for the first time, and the gentle concern she saw there nearly undid her completely. "It's nice to meet you," she managed, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "The pleasure is entirely mine," Dante replied, and something in his tone made it clear that he meant every word. He'd noticed the red marks on her wrist, the carefully controlled fear in her posture, the way she flinched slightly when Derek touched her. Every detail confirmed what he'd already suspected about the dynamic between them. Derek, sensing that the conversation was somehow slipping beyond his control, decided to reassert his dominance. "We were just discussing some business matters ourselves," he said with false joviality. "Chloe has some interesting opinions about women in the workplace." The comment was clearly intended to diminish her, but Dante's response surprised them both. "Is that so?" he said, turning his full attention to Chloe. "I'd love to hear your thoughts. In my experience, the most successful businesses are those that recognize talent regardless of gender." It was exactly the kind of progressive statement that would have sent Derek into a fury if it had come from Chloe, but coming from a potential client with obvious wealth and influence, He was forced to smile and nod along. The contradiction wasn't lost on anyone at the table. For the next several minutes, Dante skillfully drew Chloe into conversation about her work and insights, treating her opinions with the kind of respect she hadn't experienced in months. Derek grew increasingly agitated as he watched his girlfriend bloom under genuine attention and appreciation, but he couldn't afford to make a scene in front of such an obviously important potential client. Eventually, Dante glanced at his watch with apparent regret. "I'm afraid I have another appointment this evening, but I'd very much like to continue our conversation soon, Derek. Perhaps we could arrange a proper meeting at your office next week?" Derek practically glowed with satisfaction as they exchanged business cards. "Absolutely. I'll have my assistant call yours to set something up." "Excellent," Dante replied, then turned back to Chloe with that same warm intensity. "It was truly a pleasure meeting you, Chloe. I hope we'll have the opportunity to speak again soon." As Dante returned to his own table, Derek's demeanor shifted immediately back to cold anger. The brief reprieve was over, and Chloe could see that her interaction with the charming stranger had only made things worse. Derek's jealousy was like gasoline on an already dangerous fire. "Ready to go?" Derek asked, though it wasn't really a question. His hand closed around her upper arm with enough pressure to ensure compliance. "We still have that conversation to finish at home." Chloe gathered her purse with hands that trembled more violently than before. As they prepared to leave, she caught one last glimpse of Dante Romano watching them from across the room. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended the casual politeness of their introduction. She saw understanding in his gray-green eyes, along with something else that looked almost like a promise. But then Derek was guiding her toward the exit with increasing urgency, and the restaurant's warm lights and gentle conversation faded behind them as they stepped into the cold night air. The safety and civility of the public space was gone, and now there was nothing standing between Chloe and whatever punishment Derek had planned for her latest perceived transgression. As their car pulled away from the restaurant, neither of them noticed the black sedan that began following at a discreet distance, or the man in the passenger seat who was already making phone calls to ensure that Chloe Matthews would not disappear into the night without protection. The ride to Derek's downtown apartment passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional sharp turn that threw Chloe against the passenger door. Derek's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and she could practically feel the rage radiating from him in waves. Every red light felt like borrowed time. Every green light brought her closer to whatever punishment he'd been planning since the restaurant. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Derek finally spoke as they pulled into the underground parking garage of his building. "Flirting with some stranger right in front of me. Making me look like a fool." "I wasn't flirting," Chloe whispered, but she knew the truth didn't matter anymore. Derek had already decided what had happened, and nothing she said would change his interpretation of events. "I was just being polite. He was your potential client." Derek slammed the car into park with unnecessary force. "Don't you dare try to spin this like you were helping my business." "I saw the way you looked at him, Chloe. I saw the way he looked at you. You think I'm stupid?" The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. Derek stood too close, his breathing heavy with barely controlled fury, while Chloe pressed herself against the far wall and tried to make herself as small as possible. She'd learned over the past 2 years to read the signs of his escalating anger, and tonight felt different from his usual emotional outbursts. Tonight felt dangerous. Inside the apartment, Derek immediately poured himself a large whiskey and began pacing the living room like a caged animal. The space was modern and expensive, all glass and steel and sharp edges that reflected his personality perfectly. Chloe stood near the entrance, still wearing her coat, afraid to move further into the apartment without permission. "Take that dress off," Derek commanded without looking at her. "I want you to get rid of everything you wore tonight. Everything he saw you in." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. "Derek, please. Can we just talk about this? I know you're upset, but..." The whiskey glass shattered against the wall inches from her head, sending amber liquid and crystal fragments across the white marble floor. Chloe flinched violently, instinctively raising her hands to protect her face as Derek advanced on her with fury blazing in his eyes. 2 years, he snarled, backing her against the front door. 2 years I've been building you into something better than what you were when I found you. Teaching you how to dress, how to speak, how to behave in civilized company. And this is how you repay me? By throwing yourself at the first man who shows you attention? His hand struck her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side, the sharp crack echoing through the apartment. Stars exploded across her vision as pain bloomed along her jaw. But worse than the physical hurt was the familiar crushing weight of shame and fear that followed. I gave you everything, Derek continued, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper she'd learned to dread. I took you from that pathetic little life you were living and made you worthy of being seen with me. And you humiliate me in public like some common whore. The second blow caught her temple, sending her stumbling sideways into the hallway. Her shoulder hit the wall hard enough to leave a bruise, but Derek was already following, his face twisted with rage and something else that looked almost like satisfaction. Chloe ran for the bathroom at the end of the hall, slamming the door behind her and throwing the deadbolt with shaking fingers. The lock was flimsy and wouldn't hold for long if Derek really wanted in, but it gave her a moment to breathe and think. Her reflection in the mirror showed a red handprint across her cheek and the beginning of what would be a spectacular black eye. Her phone was in her purse, which was still clutched in her trembling hands. With fumbling fingers, she found her sister's number and pressed call, praying that Mia would answer despite the late hour. Chloe? Mia's voice was thick with sleep, but immediately alert when she heard her sister's shaky breathing. What's wrong? What happened? I need help, Chloe whispered, conscious that Derek was probably listening at the door. He's really angry this time, Mia. I think he's going to really hurt me. On the other side of the door, Derek's voice had taken on a cajoling tone that was somehow more frightening than his earlier rage. Come on out, baby. Let's talk about this like adults. I'm sorry I lost my temper, but you know how you get me sometimes. You know exactly which buttons to push. Where are you? Mia demanded, and Chloe could hear her sister moving around, probably getting dressed. I'm calling the police. No, Chloe said quickly. You know they won't do anything. They never do anything. And it'll just make him angrier later. It was true, and they both knew it. Derek was too smart to leave visible marks most of the time, too charming when the authorities showed up, too well-connected for minor domestic disturbance calls to stick. Chloe had learned from previous attempts to seek help that the system wasn't designed to protect women like her from men like Derek. The doorknob rattled as Derek tried to turn it. Then his voice turned cold again. Open this door right now, Chloe, or I'm going to break it down. And if I have to break it down, you're going to pay for the damage along with everything else. Chloe was about to end the call when she heard something that didn't make sense. Male voices in the living room that definitely weren't Derek's. Deep, authoritative voices speaking in clipped, professional tones. Derek, what voices? She whispered into the phone, but before Mia could respond, the apartment filled with the sound of Derek shouting. What the hell are you doing in my apartment? Get out. Get out right now, or I'm calling the police. The response was calm and measured, carrying easily through the thin bathroom door. I don't think you want to involve the police in this, Mr. Chambers. Not when they might ask uncomfortable questions about the condition of your girlfriend. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was Dante Romano, the man from the restaurant who treated her with such unexpected kindness. Somehow, impossibly, he was here. Chloe, what's happening? Mia's voice seemed to come from very far away. Chloe, talk to me. I think someone's here to help, Chloe whispered, hardly daring to believe it. I think I'm going to be okay. In the living room, Derek's voice had risen to a near shriek. You can't just break into people's homes. I have rights. I have connections. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, Dante's voice carried a note of amusement that somehow made him sound even more dangerous. I know exactly who I'm messing with. The question is whether you understand who you're dealing with now. There was a long moment of silence, then Derek's voice again, smaller now and edged with genuine fear. What do you want? I want you to step away from that bathroom door and sit down on your couch. I want you to put your hands where I can see them and think very carefully about your next words. Chloe heard movement in the living room, the sound of Derek's expensive shoes on marble, then Dante's voice again, closer now to the bathroom door. Chloe, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? She unlocked the door with trembling fingers and opened it to find Dante standing in the hallway, his gray-green eyes dark with controlled fury as he took in her injured face. Behind him, she could see two other men in expensive suits flanking Derek, who sat on his own couch looking smaller and more pathetic than she'd ever seen him. "I'm okay," she managed, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Her cheek throbbed, her temple was swelling, and she could taste blood from where she'd bitten her tongue during the second blow. Dante's jaw tightened as he examined her injuries, but his voice remained gentle. "We need to get you out of here. He's not going to stop, and next time might be worse." From the living room, Derek found his voice again, though it shook with fear and rage. "You can't just take her. She lives here. She's my girlfriend." One of Dante's men said something in rapid Italian that made Derek shrink back against the couch cushions. Dante himself never took his eyes off Chloe as he responded in English. "She's leaving voluntarily. Aren't you, Chloe?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications she was only beginning to understand. Accepting Dante's help meant stepping into a world she knew nothing about, trusting a man who was clearly dangerous in his own right. But staying meant facing Derek's escalating violence with no protection and no hope of escape. "Yes," she said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I want to leave." Dante nodded and stepped back to give her space to move. "Pack whatever you need for a few days. We'll send someone back for the rest of your things later." As she gathered her belongings from the bedroom, Chloe could hear Derek pleading with Dante's men, his voice taking on the wheedling tone she remembered from their early relationship. "Look, I lost my temper tonight. I admit that. But this is between me and my girlfriend. We can work this out ourselves. There's no need for outside interference." Dante's response was quiet, but carried clearly through the apartment. "If I hear that you've tried to contact her, if I hear that you've gone anywhere near her workplace or her family, if I even hear that you've mentioned her name to another living soul, you're going to discover just how much outside interference I'm capable of providing." When Chloe emerged from the bedroom with a small suitcase, she found Derek staring at her with a mixture of rage and disbelief that suggested he still couldn't quite accept what was happening. For 2 years, he'd controlled every aspect of her life through fear and manipulation. The idea that someone might simply take her away from him seemed to have broken something in his understanding of how the world worked. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You'll come back, Chloe. You always come back. You need me." She looked at him for what she hoped would be the last time. This man who'd systematically destroyed her self-worth and isolated her from everyone who cared about her. Sitting there surrounded by Dante's men, he looked like exactly what he was. A bully and a coward who only felt powerful when terrorizing someone smaller than himself. "No, Derek," she said quietly. "I really don't." The elevator ride down to the parking garage passed in silence. Dante's men had remained upstairs to have what they called a final conversation with Derek, but Dante himself had insisted on escorting her personally. In the confined space, she became acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he positioned himself slightly between her and the door out of what seemed like pure instinct. When they reached the parking garage, a black sedan was waiting with its engine running. Dante opened the back door for her with old-fashioned courtesy that felt surreal after everything that had just happened. "Where are we going?" she asked as they pulled out into the late-night traffic. "My penthouse," Dante replied. "It's secure, and you'll be safe there while we figure out a more permanent solution." The implications of spending the night in a stranger's home weren't lost on her, but the alternative was returning to Derek or trying to navigate this crisis entirely alone. At least with Dante, she felt protected rather than hunted. "I don't understand why you're helping me," she said quietly. "You don't know me. This isn't your problem." Dante was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights flashing past the window. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested personal experience with violence and its aftermath. "Every man has a code, Chloe. Lines he won't cross, things he won't tolerate. Watching someone hurt a woman who can't defend herself crosses every line I have." As they drove through the city toward whatever came next, Chloe found herself studying this enigmatic man who'd appeared in her life like some kind of dark guardian angel. She knew almost nothing about him except that he commanded enough respect to make Derek cower in his own apartment and enough resources to orchestrate a rescue with military precision. Whatever world Dante Romano inhabited, it was clearly one where problems were solved quickly and decisively, where violence was met with superior force, and where a man's word carried the weight of absolute law. It should have terrified her, But after 2 years of psychological warfare with Derek, the promise of genuine protection felt like the most precious gift anyone had ever offered her. Chloe woke to unfamiliar sounds filtering through expensive blackout curtains, the distant hum of traffic far below, the soft whir of central air conditioning, and something else that took her a moment to identify. Someone was cooking, and whatever they were making smelled incredible. The guest bedroom where she'd spent the night was larger than her entire studio apartment, decorated in warm neutrals with furniture that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but heavy automated blinds had kept the room dark until she'd fumbled for the controls on the bedside panel. For a moment, the luxury of her surroundings made the previous night feel like some kind of elaborate dream. Then she caught sight of herself in the mirrored closet doors, and reality came crashing back. The left side of her face was a spectacular canvas of purple and blue bruises. Her bottom lip was split and swollen, and finger-shaped marks decorated her upper arms like some grotesque jewelry. She'd showered before bed using toiletries that Dante had somehow procured for her, and someone had left a selection of clothes in her size hanging in the closet. Nothing too personal or intimate, just well-made basics and fabrics that felt like silk against her skin. The level of thoughtfulness and preparation suggested that rescuing women from dangerous situations might not be entirely outside Dante's usual experience. Following the scent of coffee and something that smelled like French toast, Chloe made her way through the penthouse toward what she assumed was the kitchen. The main living area was even more impressive in daylight, all open space and clean lines with artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything spoke of wealth, but more than that, it spoke of confidence and power. She found Dante standing at a professional-grade stove, wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and he moved around the kitchen with the same fluid confidence he displayed the night before. But there was something almost domestic about the scene that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Good morning," he said without turning around, though she was certain she'd been silent in her approach. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she answered honestly. "The bed was incredibly comfortable. Thank you for everything you did last night. I don't know how you knew to come, but I'm grateful." Dante turned to face her, and she watched his jaw tighten as he took in the full extent of her injuries in the morning light. His gray-green eyes darkened with what looked like rage, but his voice remained gentle. "I had someone keeping an eye on the situation after what I witnessed at the restaurant. When it became clear that Derek intended to escalate things, we decided to intervene." The casual way he mentioned having someone watch Derek's apartment raised questions that Chloe wasn't sure she was ready to have answered. Instead, she focused on the more immediate mystery of breakfast. "You cook?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Dante's mouth curved into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "My mother would disown me if I couldn't feed myself properly. Growing up in an Italian household means learning that food is love, and love is survival." He gestured toward the breakfast bar, where he'd already set out coffee, fresh fruit, and what appeared to be some kind of stuffed French toast with a dusting of powdered sugar. The presentation was restaurant quality, and the smell was making her mouth water despite the tenderness in her jaw. "This looks amazing," she said, settling onto one of the leather bar stools. "I usually just grab coffee and a granola bar on my way out the door." "That explains why you're too thin," Dante replied matter-of-factly, placing a plate in front of her. "You need to take better care of yourself." The comment should have triggered her defensive reflexes after 2 years of Derek's constant criticism about her appearance. But something in Dante's tone made it clear that he was concerned rather than judgmental. When was the last time someone had worried about whether she was eating enough rather than controlling what she was allowed to eat? As they shared breakfast, Dante proved to be an unexpectedly engaging conversationalist. He asked about her work, her interests, her family, and actually listened to her answers with the kind of focused attention that made her feel like the only person in the world. It was a stark contrast to Derek's habit of interrupting her or dismissing her thoughts as irrelevant. "What kind of business are you in?" she asked eventually, curiosity overcoming her natural caution. "You mentioned construction and restaurants last night." Dante's expression became carefully neutral, and she sensed that they were entering more complicated territory. "My family has been in construction for 3 generations." We specialize in commercial real estate development, mostly in the downtown area. The restaurants are a more recent venture, but food service pairs well with real estate when you understand both industries. It sounded legitimate and successful, but there was something in the way he chose his words that suggested he was offering her the sanitized version of a more complex truth. Still, she wasn't in a position to demand complete transparency from someone who'd risked himself to help her. "I should call in to work," she said, suddenly remembering that it was Thursday morning and she was supposed to be at her desk in less than an hour. "They'll wonder where I am." Dante shook his head firmly. "You're not going back to work until we're certain Derek doesn't know your schedule and won't try to intercept you there. Call in sick for the rest of the week. If you need a doctor's note, I can arrange that." The suggestion that she might need medical documentation for her injuries was sobering, but also practical. Derek had never hit her hard enough to require emergency medical attention before, but last night had felt different. More dangerous, more out of control. While she called her supervisor and explained that she'd come down with a severe flu, Dante disappeared into what appeared to be a home office. She could hear him speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the phone, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was used to giving orders and having them followed without question. After the work call, she found herself alone in the main living area, free to explore her temporary sanctuary. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the building, with panoramic views in every direction. The kitchen was a chef's dream. The living area was spacious enough to host formal dinner parties, and she'd counted at least 4 bedrooms and an equal number of bathrooms during her tentative exploration. Dante found her standing at the wall of windows overlooking the harbor, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. The view was spectacular, but he was more interested in watching the emotions play across her face as she processed everything that had happened. "It's beautiful up here," she said softly, "like being above all the chaos and noise of the real world." "Sometimes distance provides perspective," Dante agreed, moving to stand beside her. "Other times it just makes you feel isolated from everything that matters." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with isolation, and Chloe found herself wondering what kind of loneliness a man like Dante might carry. He had obvious wealth, apparent power, and the kind of commanding presence that probably drew people to him effortlessly. But she was beginning to understand that external success didn't necessarily translate to internal peace. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of Marco, Dante's second-in-command from the previous night. He was younger than his boss, probably in his late 20s, with nervous energy and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. He spoke to Dante in Italian, but his frequent glances toward Chloe made it clear that she was part of the conversation. Dante's expression grew increasingly grim as Marco delivered his report. Finally, he switched back to English, presumably for Chloe's benefit. "Derek has been making calls since early this morning. He's trying to find out who I am and what kind of resources I have available. He's also been asking questions about your family and your work schedule." Chloe felt her stomach drop. She'd hoped that Derek's fear the previous night would be enough to make him back down permanently, but she should have known better. Derek didn't handle humiliation well, and being forced to give her up in front of witnesses would have damaged his ego beyond repair. "What kind of questions?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marco answered directly, his English accented but precise. "He called your sister's apartment building this morning, claiming to be from your credit card company. The doorman didn't give him any information, but he's clearly trying to establish a pattern of movement for your family members." The idea of Derek involving Mia in his revenge fantasies made Chloe feel sick. Her younger sister was only 22, still in college, completely unprepared to deal with someone like Derek when he was focused and angry. "We need to warn her," Chloe said, reaching for her phone. "She needs to know what's happening." "Already done," Dante replied. "I had someone contact campus security and the local police. Your sister is being escorted to her classes today, and she's staying with friends off campus tonight. Derek won't be able to find her." The casual way he mentioned having resources in multiple locations raised more questions about exactly what kind of business empire Dante operated, but Chloe found herself grateful rather than suspicious. In less than 12 hours, he demonstrated a level of protective capability that Derek's money and connections couldn't match. "Tell me about him," Dante said once Marco had left to continue monitoring Derek's activities. "How long has he been hurting you?" The question was direct, but not accusatory, asked in the same tone he might use to inquire about the weather. Somehow that made it easier to answer honestly. It wasn't always like this, she began, then stopped. That wasn't quite true, was it? The signs had been there from the beginning, but she'd been so grateful for Derek's attention and apparent sophistication that she'd overlooked the red flags. He was so confident, so successful. I thought he was helping me become better than I was. Dante listened without interruption as she told him about the gradual erosion of her independence, the way Derek had slowly isolated her from friends and family, the escalating pattern of emotional and physical abuse that had culminated in the previous night's violence. She found herself sharing details she'd never spoken aloud before, things she'd been too ashamed to admit even to herself. When she finished, Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a question that surprised her. What did you want to do before you met him? What were your dreams? Chloe blinked, thrown by the shift in focus from past trauma to buried aspirations. I wanted to start my own marketing consultancy eventually. Small businesses, local nonprofits, organizations that needed professional help but couldn't afford big agencies. And now? Now I don't know, she admitted. I've been focused on just getting through each day for so long that I stopped thinking about the future. Derek always said my ideas were unrealistic anyway. Derek was wrong about a lot of things, Dante said firmly, but especially about that. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully, and she was startled to see genuine admiration in his expression. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? Like she was capable of more than just surviving? Their conversation was interrupted by the need for practical considerations. Chloe's clothes from the previous night were wrinkled and blood-stained, and the borrowed outfit from Dante's mysterious collection was clearly meant to be temporary. If she was going to be staying in his penthouse for more than a day or two, she needed her own things. We'll go shopping, Dante decided. There's a district downtown where we can find everything you need without attracting attention. The shopping trip proved to be unlike anything Chloe had ever experienced. Dante didn't just take her to department stores. He took her to the kind of exclusive boutiques where personal shoppers appeared the moment they walked through the door and prices were never discussed because anyone shopping there clearly didn't need to worry about money. At first, Chloe tried to protest the expense, but Dante dismissed her concerns with the kind of casual authority that suggested he was used to taking care of people's needs without negotiation. More surprising was his involvement in the selection process. He had strong opinions about colors that complemented her complexion, styles that flattered her figure, and fabrics that would be comfortable for extended wear. Derek had always selected her clothes based on his own preferences and what he thought projected the right image for his girlfriend. Dante seemed more interested in what made her feel confident and comfortable in her own skin. The most revealing moment came when she emerged from a dressing room wearing an elegant emerald dress that brought out the green in her eyes. Dante's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His eyes darkened, his breathing seemed to shift, and for a moment the careful control he maintained over his expressions slipped completely. That one, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. Definitely that one. The heated look he gave her sent unexpected warmth flooding through her body, and Chloe realized with some surprise that she was attracted to this dangerous, complicated man who'd rescued her from Derek's violence. The realization should have been disturbing given everything she'd been through, but instead it felt like waking up after a long, dreamless sleep. By the time they returned to the penthouse, she had a wardrobe suitable for everything from casual days at home to formal dinner parties. More importantly, she had clothes that made her feel like herself again rather than like Derek's carefully constructed version of who he thought she should be. That evening, Dante cooked again, this time elaborate Italian meal that filled the penthouse with rich, complex aromas. They ate by candlelight at his dining room table, which overlooked the city lights twinkling far below. The wine was excellent, the conversation was stimulating, and Chloe found herself relaxing in a way that felt foreign after months of constant tension. As the evening progressed, she became increasingly aware of Dante's presence in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or relief. The way he moved with controlled grace, the way his hands looked holding a wine glass, the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. There was an intensity to him that was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. "Tell me about your family," she said, partly from genuine curiosity, and partly to distract herself from the growing attraction that seemed to intensify with every shared glance. Dante's expression softened as he spoke about his mother Sophia, who apparently still lived in the family home and had strong opinions about everything from his choice of business associates to his bachelor status. He mentioned cousins and uncles involved in various family enterprises, painting a picture of a close-knit clan with old-world values and new-world ambitions. What he didn't mention, Chloe noticed, were specific details about the nature of those family enterprises or why someone in legitimate construction and restaurant businesses would have the kind of resources and connections he'd demonstrated. But she was beginning to understand that Dante shared information carefully and deliberately, revealing only what he chose to reveal. As they finished dinner and moved to the living area with fresh wine, the atmosphere between them shifted into something more charged. They sat on opposite ends of his leather sofa, but Chloe was acutely aware of every movement he made, every subtle change in his expression. When he reached across to refill her wine glass, their fingers brushed briefly, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. Dante's hand stilled for just a moment, suggesting he'd felt it too. Then he completed the motion and settled back into his seat. "Chloe," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning tone that she couldn't quite interpret. "You should know that I'm not a safe man to get involved with." The statement hung between them like a challenge. She could see the conflict in his gray-green eyes, the battle between desire and what he clearly believed was his better judgment. "I'm not sure I care about safe anymore," she replied honestly. Safe was Derek's apartment, and look how that turned out. Dante leaned forward, closing some of the distance between them, and Chloe's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her, and everything in her body was screaming that she wanted him to. Then his phone rang with a harsh electronic tone that shattered the moment completely. Dante answered it immediately, his expression shifting from heated desire to cold professionalism in the span of a heartbeat. The conversation was brief and conducted entirely in Italian, but Chloe could tell from Dante's tone that it wasn't good news. When he ended the call, his jaw was tight with controlled anger. "Derek has been spotted near your workplace with 3 men we don't recognize," he said grimly. "It looks like he's escalating faster than we expected." The romantic tension evaporated instantly, replaced by familiar fear and the cold realization that Derek wasn't going to let her disappear quietly into her new life. Whatever came next was going to be more dangerous than hiding in Dante's penthouse and pretending that her problems might resolve themselves. But as she looked at Dante's expression, she saw something that gave her hope even in the face of escalating danger. He wasn't planning to abandon her to deal with Derek alone. Whatever resources and connections he commanded, whatever dangerous world he operated in, he was prepared to use all of it to keep her safe. The question now was whether she was prepared to accept everything that kind of protection might entail. A week of living in Dante's penthouse had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural despite the unusual circumstances. Chloe worked remotely from his dining room table, her laptop surrounded by papers and coffee cups, while city noise filtered up from far below. Dante conducted his own business from a home office that she'd glimpsed but never entered, emerging periodically to check on her or bring her fresh coffee with the kind of thoughtful attention that still caught her off guard. They'd fallen into an easy domestic rhythm that felt more intimate than anything she'd shared with Derek during 2 years of officially living together. Dante cooked elaborate breakfasts while she handled emails. She discovered his weakness for terrible action movies while he learned about her habit of reading 3 books simultaneously. They debated everything from politics to food preferences with the kind of passionate engagement that suggested genuine interest in each other's thoughts. Most surprisingly, Dante never made her feel like a burden or an imposition despite the obvious disruption to his normal routine. If anything, he seemed to enjoy having someone to cook for, someone to talk to during the quiet evening hours when his business calls had ended and the city settled into darkness around them. But beneath the comfortable domesticity, Chloe was becoming increasingly aware of the complexity of the man who'd rescued her. Phone calls came at all hours, usually in rapid Italian that sounded like military briefings. Men arrived for brief meetings that took place behind closed doors. Dante carried himself with the kind of unconscious authority that suggested he was used to making decisions that affected many people, decisions that probably went far beyond construction projects and restaurant management. It was Thursday night, exactly 1 week since the confrontation at Derek's apartment, when the carefully maintained boundaries between them finally began to dissolve. They'd shared another elaborate dinner followed by wine and conversation that had gradually shifted from safe topics to more personal territory. "Tell me about your childhood," Dante said, refilling her wine glass as they sat together on his leather sofa. "What made you the woman you are?" Chloe was quiet for a long moment, swirling the rich red wine and watching it catch the light from the city far below. She'd spent the past week carefully avoiding this kind of deep personal revelation, afraid that sharing her wounds might somehow diminish the fragile confidence she'd been rebuilding under his care. "My father left when I was 8, she said finally. "Just disappeared one day while my mother was at work and Mia was at daycare. I came home from school to find him packing his clothes into garbage bags." Dante's expression didn't change, but she felt him shift slightly closer to her on the sofa, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "He told me that he'd found someone who made him happier, someone who didn't criticize him or make demands on his time. He said that if I learned how to be less difficult, maybe someday a man would want to stay with me too." The words came easier now that she'd started, spilling out along with emotions she'd buried for 16 years. She told him about the years of watching her mother struggle to raise 2 daughters alone, the way she'd internalized her father's abandonment as evidence of her own fundamental inadequacy, the unconscious patterns that had made Derek's initial attention feel like validation rather than manipulation. "I spent so many years believing that love was something you had to earn by being perfect enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough," she continued. "When Derek started pointing out my flaws and offering to help me fix them, it felt familiar. It felt like what I deserved." Dante's hand covered hers where it rested on the sofa between them, his fingers warm and steady against her skin. The contact was simple but profound, an anchor that kept her grounded as she navigated painful memories. "Your father was wrong," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "And Derek was wrong. Love isn't something you earn through perfection. It's something freely given to someone whose imperfections make them more beautiful, not less." Something in his tone made her look up to meet his eyes, and what she saw there took her breath away. Heat, yes, but also tenderness and a kind of fierce protectiveness that went far beyond duty or charity. "What about you?" she asked, turning her hand so that their fingers could intertwine naturally. "What made you the man you are?" Dante was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and responsibilities shouldered too young. "My father died when I was 22, he said. "Heart attack, sudden and massive. One day he was teaching me about honor and family obligations. The next day, I was standing at his funeral, trying to figure out how to fill shoes that felt impossibly large." He told her about the pressure of inheriting not just businesses, but entire networks of relationships and responsibilities that had taken his father decades to build. About making decisions that affected hundreds of people while still grieving the man who should have been there to guide him through the complexity of leadership. "I never got to be young and stupid and irresponsible," Dante continued, his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. "I went straight from college student to head of the family, and every choice I made carried weight I wasn't prepared to handle." There was something in the way he said family that suggested it meant more than just blood relatives, but Chloe didn't push for clarification. Instead, she turned their joined hands so that she could study his fingers, the calluses that spoke of physical work despite his obvious wealth, the thin white scar across his knuckles that hinted at violence in his past. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "The path you chose?" "I didn't choose it so much as inherit it," Dante replied. "But I've never regretted protecting the people I care about, whatever that required." The conversation might have continued deeper into personal territory, but it was interrupted by the harsh ring of Dante's phone. He answered it immediately, his posture shifting into the alert professionalism she'd learned to associate with serious business. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in rapid Italian with undertones that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. When he ended the call, his jaw was set in the hard lines she'd learned to recognize as barely controlled anger. "Derek tried to break into your office building this afternoon," Dante said without preamble. "Security cameras caught him with 3 men, at least two of whom were carrying weapons. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. She'd been working remotely all week, but her colleagues were still going about their normal routines, completely unaware that they might be in danger because of her connection to Derek. Was anyone hurt? She asked, dreading the answer. No, but only because security was alerted and police responded quickly. Derek and his associates fled before they could gain access to the building. Relief washed through her, followed immediately by guilt and fear. How long before Derek's obsession with revenge escalated to the point where innocent people got caught in the crossfire? This can't continue, she said, though she wasn't sure what alternative she was suggesting. I can't keep hiding in your penthouse while he terrorizes everyone I've ever known. Dante leaned forward, his gray-green eyes intense in the dim lighting. You're right. It can't continue, which is why I'm going to end it. There was something in his tone that made her blood run cold, a finality that suggested he wasn't talking about legal remedies or protective restraining orders. What do you mean by end it? She asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Dante stood and moved to the windows, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass as he stared out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing business logistics rather than life and death. Derek Chambers is a dangerous man who has made it clear that he will never stop hunting you. The legal system can't protect you from someone with his resources and connections, and I won't spend the rest of my life watching over my shoulder for his next escalation. The implication hung between them like a blade. Chloe found herself caught between horror at what he was suggesting and relief at the thought that Derek's reign of terror might finally end permanently. I can't ask you to do that, she whispered. I can't have someone's death on my conscience, even someone like Derek. Dante turned back to face her, and the expression in his eyes was unlike anything she'd seen from him before. Not cold, exactly, but utterly resolved. You're not asking me to do anything. I'm telling you what I've decided to do. Some problems can't be solved with restraining orders and security cameras, Chloe. Some problems require permanent solutions. She stood up from the sofa, moving toward him with hands that trembled slightly. Every moral instinct she'd been raised with said that violence was wrong, that there had to be another way, that civilized people didn't solve their problems through elimination of their enemies. But she was also beginning to understand that Dante operated in a world where different rules applied, where strength and decisiveness were more valuable than moral purity, where protecting the people you loved sometimes required crossing lines that ordinary people never had to consider. When she reached him at the windows, she placed her hands on his chest and felt the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palms. He was solid and real and completely committed to keeping her safe, whatever that required. Are you going to be in danger? She asked, because that possibility frightened her more than her own safety ever had. No, he said simply. I'm very good at handling problems like Derek. The confidence in his voice should have been disturbing, but instead it was oddly comforting. This man had capabilities and resources that Derek couldn't match, connections and experience that made him far more dangerous than a spoiled businessman with anger management issues. Chloe rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring all of her gratitude and growing feelings into the connection between them. Dante's response was immediate and overwhelming, his arms coming around her with careful strength as he deepened the kiss with an intensity that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the atmosphere between them had shifted into something charged and inevitable. Chloe, Dante said, his voice rough with desire and warning. If we do this, there's no going back. I'm not a casual man, and I don't do temporary relationships. I don't want temporary, she replied, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. I want whatever this is between us. I want you. What followed was unlike anything she'd ever experienced with Derek or anyone else. Dante touched her like she was precious and powerful simultaneously, his hands reverent but confident as he learned the shape of her body. He asked permission with his eyes and his touch before each escalation, making sure she was completely present and willing for every moment of their physical connection. When he carried her to his bedroom, she felt safe and cherished rather than conquered. When he undressed her slowly, pausing to kiss each revealed inch of skin, she felt beautiful rather than exposed. And when they finally came together completely, it was with an emotional intimacy that transformed the physical act into something transcendent. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his massive bed, Chloe's head on his chest, as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The city lights painted geometric patterns on the ceiling above them, and she felt more at peace than she had in years. "I love you," Dante said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I know it's too soon and too complicated, but I need you to know that this isn't just about protecting you anymore." Chloe lifted her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression that he probably showed to very few people. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it completely despite the impossibility of their situation. The next morning brought a return to domestic normalcy, but with an underlying current of intimacy that changed everything between them. Dante made breakfast while Chloe showered, and they ate together with the comfortable closeness of established lovers rather than reluctant house guests. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant woman in her early 60s, impeccably dressed and carrying herself with the kind of natural authority that suggested she was used to being the most important person in any room. "Mama," Dante said, rising immediately to kiss both of his mother's cheeks. "I wasn't expecting you this morning." Sophia Romano's sharp eyes took in Chloe's presence at the breakfast table, the obvious intimacy between her son and this unknown woman, and the lingering evidence of recent violence on Chloe's face. Her expression was unreadable as Dante performed introductions in rapid Italian followed by careful English. "Chloe, this is my mother, Sophia Romano. Mama, this is Chloe Matthews." Sophia approached the breakfast table with measured steps, studying Chloe with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat or ally. When she finally spoke, her English carried only the faintest trace of an accent. "So you are the woman my son has been protecting," she said, settling into the chair that Dante held for her. "You are the reason he has been so distracted this week." "Yes, ma'am," Chloe replied, uncertain of the appropriate response but determined to meet Sophia's direct gaze. "I'm grateful for everything your son has done for me." Sophia's expression softened slightly, though her assessment continued. "You have been hurt," she observed. "Someone treated you badly." It wasn't a question, and Chloe found herself nodding in acknowledgement of the older woman's blunt observation. "Men who hurt women are cowards," Sophia continued with conviction. "They deserve whatever consequences find them." The statement was delivered with such matter-of-fact authority that Chloe realized she was getting a glimpse into the value system that had shaped Dante's worldview. In Sophia Romano's universe, there were clear lines between right and wrong, and crossing those lines brought swift and decisive retribution. Over the course of an hour-long visit that felt like an extended interview, Sophia drew out details about Chloe's background, her work, her family, and her intentions regarding her son. The questions were direct, but not unkind, and Chloe found herself responding with more honesty than she'd shown to anyone except Dante himself. When Sophia finally rose to leave, she surprised Chloe by taking her hands in a maternal gesture that felt like acceptance. "You will come to Sunday dinner this week," she said. "The family should meet the woman who has captured Dante's attention so completely." After Sophia left, Dante seemed more relaxed than he'd been since Derek's escalation had been confirmed. His mother's approval clearly mattered to him, and her acceptance of Chloe represented a significant milestone in whatever they were building together. But their peaceful afternoon was shattered by another urgent phone call, this one with news that made Dante's face go absolutely cold with rage. "They took your sister," he said after ending the call, his voice deadly quiet. "Derek and his associates grabbed Mia outside her dorm this morning. They're demanding that you meet them alone at a location of their choosing." Terror unlike anything she'd ever experienced flooded through Chloe's system. Mia was innocent, young, completely unprepared to deal with Derek's violence and desperation. The thought of her sister frightened and hurt because of Chloe's choices was unbearable. "What do they want?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "They want you," Dante replied. "They think they can trade her safety for your compliance." His phone was already in his hand, speed-dialing numbers with practiced efficiency. As he began issuing rapid commands in Italian, Chloe realized that whatever restraint had been holding him back from dealing with Derek permanently had just evaporated completely. The time for protection and defensive measures was over. Now it was time for war. Dante's response to Derek's kidnapping attempt was swift and decisive in a way that left no doubt about his capabilities when the people he loved were threatened. Within minutes of receiving the call about Mia, he had mobilized resources that Derek couldn't have anticipated in his desperate planning. It turned out that Dante had been having both Mia and Derek monitored since the night of Chloe's rescue, a precaution that proved invaluable when Derek's associates attempted to grab Mia outside her dorm building. The kidnapping was thwarted before it could succeed, Derek's men subdued by Dante's security team with efficiency that spoke to extensive training and experience in handling exactly these kinds of situations. Derek himself was taken into custody by men who answered only to Dante, and within 6 hours of his failed gambit, the threat that had dominated Chloe's life for weeks was eliminated completely and permanently. Dante didn't provide details about how the situation was resolved, and Chloe found herself not wanting to know the specifics. What mattered was that Derek Chambers would never hurt another woman, never terrorize anyone with his particular brand of entitled violence, never again use fear and intimidation to control someone smaller and more vulnerable than himself. The world was safer without him in it, and Chloe felt no guilt about that fundamental truth. Mia was safe, physically unharmed though shaken by her brief encounter with Derek's desperation. When Dante's men brought her to the penthouse that evening, the sisters clung to each other with the fierce relief of people who had almost lost everything that mattered. "Thank you," Mia whispered to Dante, her young face serious with genuine gratitude. "I don't know what would have happened if your people hadn't been watching." "Family protects family," Dante replied simply, and something in the way he said it made it clear that both sisters were now included in that circle of absolute protection. As the immediate crisis faded into memory, Chloe found herself marveling at how much she had changed in such a short time. The terrified woman who had cowered in Derek's bathroom just weeks ago felt like a stranger now. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, someone who had learned that love didn't require diminishing yourself to accommodate someone else's insecurities. Dante had shown her what it felt like to be cherished rather than controlled, protected rather than dominated, loved for her strength rather than despite her supposed weaknesses. Under his care, she had rediscovered parts of herself that Derek had systematically crushed, dreams and ambitions that she'd forgotten she once possessed. "I want to start that consulting business I used to talk about," she told Dante one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and crimson. "I want to help small businesses and nonprofits build their marketing presence. Give them the kind of professional support they can't usually afford." Dante's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "I know several business owners who could use exactly that kind of expertise. We could start by connecting you with some of my restaurant contacts. Build your client base gradually." The easy way he said "we," the automatic inclusion of himself in her professional planning, made her heart skip with happiness. This wasn't just romantic love, though the passion between them continued to burn bright and constant. This was partnership, the kind of equal collaboration she dreamed of but never experienced. As autumn shifted toward winter, their relationship deepened into something that felt unshakable and permanent. Chloe officially moved her belongings into Dante's penthouse, transforming the guest room into a home office where she could meet with clients and manage her growing consultancy. Dante's family embraced her with the warmth reserved for someone considered truly part of the clan, and his business associates treated her with respect that reflected her importance in his life. The extended Romano family was vast and complex, encompassing everything from legitimate business owners to people whose exact occupations remained diplomatically undefined. What mattered was the fierce loyalty that bound them together, the unwavering commitment to protecting their own that made Chloe feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life. It was during the family's traditional Christmas Eve dinner that Dante made his intentions unmistakably clear. The evening had been magical, filled with excellent food, flowing wine, and the kind of boisterous conversation that only happened when multiple generations gathered under one roof. Sophia had outdone herself with the meal, and Dante's various cousins, uncles, and family friends had welcomed Chloe with warmth that felt completely genuine. She'd found herself laughing more in one evening than she had in months with Derek, feeling truly part of something larger than herself. As the evening wound down and family members began to drift toward their own homes, Dante asked Chloe to step out onto the terrace with him for a moment of privacy. The December air was crisp and clear, and the city sparkled below them like a constellation brought down to earth. "This has been the best Christmas of my life," Chloe said, leaning against the terrace railing and breathing in the cold night air. "Your family is wonderful. I feel like I belong somewhere for the first time since I was a child." Dante moved to stand behind her, his arms coming around her waist as his chin rested on top of her head. "That's good," he said quietly, "because I have something to ask you that requires you to feel like you belong here permanently." Something in his tone made her turn in his arms to face him, and her breath caught when she saw him lowering himself to one knee, a small velvet box appearing in his hands with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested careful planning. "Chloe Matthews," he said, his voice carrying the same authority he used for business decisions, but warmed with tenderness that was reserved only for her. "You've brought light into parts of my life I didn't even realize were dark. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope for a future beyond just surviving each day." The ring he revealed was spectacular but tasteful, a classic solitaire setting that would have cost more than she used to make in a year, but somehow felt exactly right for the moment and the man offering it. "I know my world is complicated and sometimes dangerous. I know that choosing me means accepting things that most people never have to deal with. But I also know that I can't imagine my life without you in it. And I want to spend whatever years we're given proving that you made the right choice in trusting me." Tears were streaming down her face before he finished speaking, but they were tears of joy rather than fear or uncertainty. Everything about this moment felt right in a way that transcended logic or careful planning. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course yes. I love you, Dante Romano, and I can't imagine my life without you either." The ring fit perfectly, which didn't surprise her given Dante's attention to detail in everything that concerned her well-being. As he stood to kiss her, sealing their engagement with passion and promise, Chloe felt the last piece of her old fearful life finally slip away completely. When they returned inside to share the news with his family, the celebration was immediate and overwhelming. Sophia wept with joy, his uncles offered elaborate toasts in rapid Italian, and his cousins began planning an engagement party that sounded like it would rival royal weddings for complexity and expense. Later that night, as they lay together in the bed they now officially shared as an engaged couple, they talked about their future with the kind of detailed planning that suggested complete commitment to building something lasting together. "I want to expand the legitimate businesses," Dante said, his fingers threading through her hair as she traced patterns on his bare chest. "The restaurants are doing well, and the construction company has more contracts than we can handle. I want to build something that our children can inherit without complications." The casual mention of children sent warmth flooding through her entire body. She'd given up on the idea of having a family during her time with Derek, whose control issues extended to dictating whether and when she might be allowed to have children. "How many children?" she asked, surprised by how much she wanted to hear his answer. "As many as you want," Dante replied immediately. "I grew up in a house full of cousins and noise and constant activity. I want our children to have that same sense of belonging to something larger than themselves." They talked until dawn about wedding plans, business expansion, family traditions they wanted to continue, and new ones they hoped to create. By the time exhaustion finally claimed them, they had outlined a future that felt both ambitious and completely achievable with their combined resources and determination. 6 months later, as Chloe stood in her wedding dress surrounded by her sister and Sophia and what felt like half the women in Dante's extended family, she could barely remember the terrified woman who had once trembled in a restaurant bathroom while Derek planned her punishment. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime, someone who had existed before she learned what real love looked like, before she understood the difference between protection and control, before she discovered her own strength through someone else's unwavering faith in her worth. Through the bridal suite windows, she could see the garden where their ceremony would take place in less than an hour. Dante would be waiting for her there, surrounded by family and friends who had embraced their love story with enthusiasm and joy. Tonight, she would officially become Chloe Romano, taking the name of a man who had shown her what it meant to be truly cherished. Tomorrow, they would begin their married life with plans for business expansion, family growth, and building the kind of legacy that honored both their individual strengths and their partnership. But first, she had a promise to make to the man who had saved her life in every way that mattered, who had seen her potential when she'd forgotten it existed, who had loved her completely without asking her to diminish herself to accommodate his needs. The woman who walked down that aisle would be confident and radiant, ready to embrace whatever challenges and joys their future might hold, secure in the knowledge that she would never face anything alone again. 6 months after their Christmas Eve engagement, Chloe Romano stood before a full-length mirror in the bridal suite of the elegant hotel where their wedding reception would take place, barely recognizing the confident woman staring back at her. The ivory silk gown Sophia had helped her select flowed like liquid starlight, and the Romano family diamonds at her throat caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. But it wasn't the expensive dress or priceless jewelry that had transformed her so completely. It was the radiant happiness in her green eyes, the confident set of her shoulders, the serene smile that spoke of a woman who had found her place in the world and never intended to give it up. "You look perfect," Mia said from behind her, adjusting the cathedral-length veil with the careful precision of someone who had appointed herself chief wedding coordinator. "Dante's going to lose his mind when he sees you." The past months had been a whirlwind of wedding planning, business expansion, and settling into their life together as an officially engaged couple. Chloe's marketing consultancy had grown beyond her wildest expectations, fueled partly by referrals from Dante's extensive business network, but sustained by her own talent and dedication. She now employed 3 other consultants and had a waiting list of clients eager for her services. More surprisingly, she'd become informally involved in managing the legitimate aspects of Dante's empire, bringing her marketing expertise to bear on restaurant promotion and construction company visibility. Her suggestions had increased revenue across multiple properties, and Dante's family had come to respect her business acumen as much as they cherished her personally. Sophia entered the bridal suite carrying a small velvet box, her eyes bright with maternal pride and affection. "For you," she said, opening the box to reveal delicate pearl earrings that had clearly been in the family for generations. "These were my mother's, and her mother's before that. Every Romano bride has worn them." The gesture brought tears to Chloe's eyes, not just because of the beautiful earrings, but because of what they represented. Complete acceptance into a family that valued loyalty and love above all else. A place where she would always belong no matter what challenges the future might bring. As they made final preparations for the ceremony, Chloe's mind drifted back to that terrifying night in the restaurant when Derek's threats had seemed insurmountable and her future had looked so bleak. If someone had told her then that she would end up married to the mysterious man who had intervened on her behalf, building a business empire alongside him while surrounded by a loving extended family, she would never have believed such happiness was possible. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. There had been moments of doubt, times when the differences between her simple background and Dante's complex world had seemed overwhelming. But Dante's patience and unwavering support had helped her navigate every challenge, while his family's embrace had given her the sense of belonging she'd craved her entire life. The wedding ceremony itself was everything they had dreamed of, intimate despite the large guest list, traditional while incorporating personal touches that reflected both their journeys to this moment. The hotel's garden was transformed into something magical, with thousands of white flowers and soft lighting that made everything feel ethereal and romantic. When the bridal party began their processional, Chloe caught her first glimpse of Dante waiting at the altar, and her breath caught in her throat. He was devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face as their eyes met that made her knees weak with love and desire. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, like he couldn't quite believe she was about to become his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion and joy. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that spoke of protection and partnership, of building a future together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment. When Dante slipped the wedding band onto her finger, his hands were steady, but his eyes were bright, with unshed tears. "You may kiss your bride," the officiant announced, and Dante's kiss was tender but thorough, conveying all the love and promise that words couldn't capture. The applause from their guests seemed to come from very far away as Chloe lost herself in the perfect rightness of the moment. The reception was a celebration worthy of a Romano family wedding, with excellent food, flowing wine, and dancing that continued long into the evening. Chloe found herself swept from one group of well-wishers to another, accepting congratulations and blessings from people who had become genuine friends over the past months. During a quiet moment between toasts, Dante pulled her aside for a private conversation on the hotel's terrace, where they could see the city lights twinkling below them like scattered diamonds. "Any regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Only that it took so long for us to find each other," Chloe replied, reaching up to straighten his bow tie with wily affection. "Though I suppose we both needed to become the people we are now before we could appreciate what we have." Dante captured her hands in his, bringing them to his lips for gentle kisses. "I love watching you with my family," he said quietly. "I love seeing how confident and happy you've become. I love knowing that we're going to spend the rest of our lives building something beautiful together." Their intimate moment was interrupted by Sophia's arrival on the terrace, her maternal instincts apparently detecting that she was missing an important conversation between her son and new daughter-in-law. "The photographer wants more pictures," she announced, but her sharp eyes took in their clasped hands and the glowing happiness on both their faces. "And I want to discuss grandchildren. When might I expect additions to the family?" Dante laughed at his mother's directness while Chloe blushed prettily. They had talked extensively about children during their engagement, both eager to start a family, but wanting to enjoy their first year of marriage before adding that particular joy and complexity to their lives. "Soon, Mama," Dante replied diplomatically. "But first we're going to enjoy our honeymoon and let Chloe establish her business exactly the way she wants it." "Good answer," Sophia said approvingly. "But not too long. I'm not getting any younger, and I have very specific ideas about how Romano children should be raised." As the evening wound down and their guests began to drift toward their own homes, Chloe and Dante found themselves alone in the hotel's elegant restaurant, sharing a quiet late dinner and reflecting on the perfect day they had just experienced. The restaurant setting was so similar to that first night when their lives had become entangled that Chloe couldn't help commenting on the parallel. But where that evening had been filled with fear and uncertainty, tonight was suffused with love and promise. "If someone had told me that night that the man who interrupted Derek's threats would become my husband, I would have thought they were crazy," she said, twirling her wedding ring around her finger and marveling at how right it felt there. "If someone had told me that the terrified woman I saw being bullied would become the strongest, most capable partner I could imagine, I might have thought the same thing," Dante replied. "But I think some part of me knew, even then, that you were special." They talked until dawn about their honeymoon plans, their business goals, their hopes for the family they wanted to build together. By the time exhaustion finally claimed them, they had outlined a future that felt both ambitious and completely achievable with their combined love and determination. 1 year later, Chloe stood in the nursery of their penthouse, gently rocking their 3-month-old daughter Sofia Elena Romano, while Dante watched from the doorway with an expression of absolute contentment. The room was painted in soft yellows and greens, filled with toys and furniture that spoke of a child who would be cherished and protected but never constrained. Little Sophia had her father's gray-green eyes and her mother's delicate features, along with what appeared to be the Romano family's gift for commanding attention through sheer force of personality. She was already the center of an extended family's devotion, spoiled outrageously by her grandmother Sophia and watched over protectively by uncles and cousins who had appointed themselves her permanent guardians. Chloe's business had continued to thrive even through pregnancy and new motherhood, partly because Dante had insisted on hiring additional support staff so she could maintain her professional life while enjoying their daughter. The Romano enterprises had also flourished under their joint management, with several new restaurants and an expansion into property development that promised continued growth. Most importantly, their marriage had only grown stronger through the challenges and joys of their first year together. They had learned to navigate the complexities of blending their different backgrounds, to communicate through disagreements, to support each other's dreams while building shared goals. As Chloe settled their daughter in her crib for the night, She reflected on how completely her life had been transformed by one evening's chance encounter with a man who had refused to stand by while she was being hurt. Derek's cruelty had brought them together, but their own choices had built the love and partnership that now defined every aspect of their existence. "She'll be beautiful like her mother," Dante murmured, wrapping his arms around Chloe from behind as they watched their daughter sleep peacefully. "And strong like her father," Chloe replied, leaning back against his solid warmth and feeling the absolute security that came from being truly, completely loved. As they stood together in the quiet nursery, surrounded by evidence of the life they had built together, Chloe knew with absolute certainty that she had found her forever. Not just romantic love, though the passion between them continued to burn bright and constant, but true partnership with someone who would always protect what mattered most while encouraging her to become everything she was capable of being. The terrified woman who had once cowered in restaurant bathrooms was gone forever, replaced by someone confident enough to build businesses, strong enough to be a worthy partner to a powerful man, secure enough to raise children who would understand both love and loyalty from their earliest moments. Sometimes fate brings protective love into your life when you least expect it, but most need it. Have you ever experienced someone stepping in to shield you from danger, or been the person offering protection to someone more vulnerable? I'd love to hear your stories about the power of love that protects without controlling, that strengthens without diminishing. Share in the comments below, and remember that real love should always make you feel safer, stronger, and more yourself than you've ever been.